on the LA Times website.
This is the Savage Nation. Be here or be nowhere.
Savage.
They're funny, they're entertaining, and I couldn't drive an hour without them.
Armstrong and Getty. Weekday morning 6 to 10. Talk 910 KNEW.
Iran continues to be a problem for the Obama administration, despite Obama's attempt to open the lanes of communication. Joining us now is KT McFarland from ktmcfarland.com to give us an update on Iran and their nuclear aspirations.
Hi, Michael. It's great to be with you again. You know, Michael, I think our most pressing national security priority has to be to stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons. So far, nothing the Obama administration has tried has worked. Frankly, nothing the Bush administration tried and worked either. During the campaign, Obama promised tough, direct diplomacy to deal with Iran. And then he actually offered that hand of friendship 3 times. In his inaugural address, and his address to the Iranian people, and in his Cairo speech. And each time it was rebuffed by the mullahs. So he did Plan B. Now, Plan B was to enlist Russian support to stop Iran's nuclear program, since they're a critical element in Iran developing and enriching uranium. But Obama came home from Moscow empty-handed just 2 weeks ago. So what's his Plan C? Well, one idea would be continue to hope that American diplomacy and Russian cooperation will eventually kick in, and yet at the same time Iran moves inexorably toward nuclear weapons. Another idea would be to let Israel attack Iran's nuclear facilities. And what seems to be their preferred option, accept Iranian atomic weapons as an fait accompli, while extending the U.S. nuclear umbrella over Israel and the moderate Arab states, which is what Secretary Clinton mentioned a few weeks ago. Well, none of these 3 are great options. First, there is nothing to indicate that Iran or Russia will change their minds in the near term, and why should they? The longer Iran strings the U.S. along, the closer they come to possessing nuclear weapons and becoming the dominant power in the region. And even if Russia were to reverse course suddenly and stop aiding Iran's nuclear program, it's not clear whether they would have much of an impact or whether they're willing to at this point. And the second option, an Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, which the Israelis are seriously considering before the end of the year.
There are a number of inherent risks with that option, though, aren't there?
It would be logistically complicated. Israeli bombers would have to fly 1,000 miles, evading the air defense systems of Iraq, Turkey, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and strike multiple dispersed targets. Many of them are hardened or buried deep underground. At best, Israel would set back Iran's nuclear program just a few years, and it would risk setting off further regional conflict. An Israeli attack might put their close relationship to the U.S. in jeopardy, especially were they to attack without President Obama's prior approval, which he is very unlikely to give. Now, recently, Secretary Clinton and others have hinted at the third option. If Iran's nuclear program cannot be stopped, could it be contained? That means they would accept Iran having nuclear weapons. And they feel that could we try a Middle East version of Cold War deterrence, where the U.S. pledges nuclear retaliation if Iran attacks Israel? Well, this option is problematic as well. First of all, is it realistic to think the American public will risk nuclear war to protect Tel Aviv or Riyadh? And similarly, it would be very cold comfort to Israel to know that America promises to annihilate Tehran if Tehran makes good on President Ahmadinejad's weekly pledge to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. Well, what does Israel care if they're obliterated, whether the United States retaliates? Defense Secretary Gates, in fact, was in Israel just last week trying to sell that idea. Accept a nuclear Iran, we'll protect you with our nuclear umbrella. But the Israelis completely rejected it. So back to the drawing table. Furthermore, if Shiite Persian Iran is allowed to develop nuclear weapons, what about the Sunni Arab states in the region? Don't Saudi Arabia and Egypt and others conclude that they need nuclear weapons of their own? And since money is no object for many of these Muslim petro-states, a nuclear Iran could set off an arms race, a nuclear arms race, Michael, in the single most unstable, dangerous part of the world. And finally, there's that issue of terrorists. Iran has very close ties to terrorist groups throughout the world, but particularly in the Middle East, Hezbollah and Hamas. What happens to those Iranian nuclear weapons? Could they find their way into the hands of terrorists, surrogates who would have no compunction or restraint to use them against Israel or to the United States?
None of these options seem very realistic, KT.
At this rate, If we don't come up with something fast, Iran will have nuclear weapons in the next 12 to 18 months, certainly by the end of Obama's first term. So what do? Lean back and accept it, or do something? Well, I think we do have some leverage, and that's gasoline. Iran may be the world's fourth largest oil exporter, but it doesn't refine that oil. And it still has to import 40% of its gasoline. And that gasoline comes from just 5 companies, 4 in Europe, 1 in India. The ships that deliver that gasoline to Iran are insured by just a handful of companies in Britain, France, Germany, and Japan. So there are pressure points. And if we can pressure those refining and insurance companies to stop doing business with Iran, we get Iran in an immediate economic stranglehold. Now, congressional legislation was recently introduced by Senator Lieberman and Kyle to that effect to sanction any company that helps Iran import gas. Congress recently voted to ban any company from selling to the U.S. Strategic Oil Reserve if they also do business with Iran. British Petroleum, in anticipation of such a move, last year stopped selling gas to Iran. They figured it was better to miss out on business with Iran than risk losing their American business. So if these European, Indian, and Japanese companies do what BP did and stop selling gas to Iran, others will no doubt move in to fill the void. They will sell to Iran, but they will charge Iran a lot more for that gas, and that means the average Iranian will see much higher prices at the pump. And that's bound to make the Iranian citizens really mad.
They tried to raise prices there before, didn't they?
Just 2 years ago, Michael, when the mullahs tried to raise gas prices, the Iranian people rioted, and they torched gas stations and took to the streets. So the one thing we can do and should do immediately is cut off Iran's gasoline. It'll encourage those Iranian citizens who recently took to the streets to protest a sham election, those leading Iranians who dared protest against the regime and are now being tried in a kangaroo court, to take to the streets again and protest an incompetent government. And then they change the regime themselves. That's the fundamental principle my boss, Ronald Reagan, realized, that we shouldn't try to change a country's leaders ourselves, but we can maneuver events so that they change their own leaders and the direction that their country goes, which is in their own best interest. And then they do it themselves, not us. That's how we help bring down the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, and that's how we help bring down the mullahs.
Katie, thanks for the update. Thanks for being on the Savage Nation.
Thanks, Michael, for letting me have a chance to be on your wonderful show.
This is the Savage Nation.
Savage. Michael Savage. Afternoons 3 to 7 on Talk 910 KNEW and online at 910KNEW.com.